Zach Golden just purchased a film, and he's gonna tell you why. Zach Golden's The Golden Collection.
In my personal opinion, the opening scene of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, while undeniably iconic, is the film's only real flaw, and perhaps one of the earliest signs of a shift in Scorsese's relationship with violence as a storyteller. Throughout most of his career, Martin Scorsese has been famous for violence, but what often gets overlooked is that his best films never used violence merely to shock. Violence was a dramatic tool. It was a culmination. It revealed character. It carried thematic weight. Take Taxi Driver, for example. The film reserves its most graphic bloodshed for the very end because the violence is the payoff to Travis Bickle's psychological deterioration. The audience spends nearly 2 hours trapped inside the mind of a man whose isolation, anger, and instability are slowly reaching a boiling point. The violence isn't there simply because violence is exciting. It's there because it's the inevitable destination of Travis's internal conflict. Or look at Raging Bull. Every punch Jake LaMotta throws carries consequences. The violence inside the ring mirrors the violence in his relationships. His inability to control his temper destroys his marriage, his friendships, and ultimately himself. I mean, the blood and brutality are expressions of character. I mean, even in The Last Temptation of Christ, it uses violence with purpose. The crucifixion is horrific. It is horrific because the story demands it. Christ's suffering is the climax of the spiritual and emotional struggle the film has been building toward. The violence served the tragedy. And then something happens in Goodfellas. The film opens with Henry Hill, Jimmy Conway, and Tommy DeVito driving down a dark road. When they hear noises coming from the trunk of their car, they pull over, they open it, and inside is this bloodied man still alive. And then Tommy proceeds to brandish this massive kitchen knife and stabs him repeatedly while Jimmy fires several shots into his body. Blood splashes everywhere. The whole scene is misted with red, and then the trunk slams shut. Then Henry's narration begins. I mean, it's a fantastic hook. It's memorable. It's one of the most famous openings in film history. But the more I've thought about it over the years, the more I've become convinced that the scene's primary function is just shock value. Now, to be fair, Scorsese had reasons for making that choice. He wanted to immediately communicate the brutal reality of organized crime. He wanted audiences to understand this wasn't The Godfather. This wasn't going to be a romanticized crime saga about honor, family, and tradition. This was a dirtier, uglier, more chaotic world. The opening scene announces that intention with a baseball bat to the face, and it worked. People walked into theaters in 1990 and immediately knew they were watching something different. But when I compare that to the way Scorsese used violence in his earlier work, something feels different. The context surrounding the moment boils down to, look how insane these people are. The violence isn't revealing a deeper truth about the characters that we don't already understand. It isn't the climax of an emotional journey. It isn't a consequence we've been dreading. It's simply there to grab our attention. Even when the film eventually catches up to that moment and reveals the full context, there's no major recontextualization. There's no twist. There's no new understanding. The scene means exactly what we thought it meant when we first saw it. The man in the trunk is exactly who he appears to be. The killers are exactly who they appear to be. The violence means exactly what it appears to mean. It's effective, yes, but it is shallow. What's interesting is that when I think back on Scorsese's earlier work, even something as small as his student short, The Big Shave, the blood carried symbolic meaning. The violence was saying something beyond the immediate act itself. It was serving an idea. In Goodfellas, at least in that opening sequence, the message feels much simpler. Look at how crazy this is. And I can't help noticing that Goodfellas sits at a fascinating point in Scorsese's career. On IMDb and in popular film culture generally, many people consider it the peak of his filmography. Yet many of the films that followed became increasingly graphic, increasingly violent, while often failing to achieve the same level of universal reverence. I find that very interesting. Now, here's what I'm not suggesting. I'm not suggesting the opening scene of Goodfellas single-handedly caused that. That would be absurd. Filmmaking is far too complicated and for such a simplistic conclusion, right? What I am suggesting is that this moment feels like one of the first times Scorsese used violence primarily as an attention-grabbing device rather than as the culmination of dramatic necessity. And what's fascinating is how little is how little it would have taken to give the scene another layer. I mean, imagine if the editing had concealed the identities of the killers. Imagine if the sequence suggested that Henry Hill might be the victim rather than the participant. Imagine if the audience spent half the film wondering who was in the trunk, only to have the truth revealed later. Suddenly, the violence isn't just shocking, it's mysterious. It creates questions, it invites interpretation, it gains dramatic value beyond its immediate visceral impact. The scene is already memorable, but adding a layer of misdirection or recontextualization could have made it deeper as well. And that's the lesson I take from it as a storyteller. None of this, by the way, makes Goodfellas a bad film. Quite the opposite. I love Goodfellas. It's one of my favorite Scorsese films and one of the greatest crime films ever made. This isn't a condemnation of the movie. It's an observation about a single creative choice. Because what struck me while revisiting the film wasn't that the violence is bad. It was that violence is a tool. Blood is a tool. Shock is a tool. And like any tool in storytelling, its value comes from purpose. The moment blood becomes the point, instead of serving the point, it risks becoming a blinking neon sign demanding attention rather than a meaningful part of the story itself. As filmmakers, writers, and storytellers, that's a lesson worth remembering, I think. Every element on the screen should be working towards something larger than itself, violence included. But let me know in the comments what you think of Goodfellas, and be sure to support the channel if this is the kind of content you enjoy. Do all the YouTube favors because, believe it or not, it does help, and we'll see you next week for my next episode of The Golden Collection.